Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Good morning, late October, but it feels like summer. It's Rochester Today. I'm Andy Brownell, and Tom Ostrom's here on Tuesday. Good morning, Tom.
Hi, Andy.
I cannot believe it's going to get up to 80 degrees this afternoon. It's almost Halloween.
Isn't it? Yep, you bet.
I welcome it. Don't get me wrong. I welcome it.
Yep.
And your team pulled off another victory, even though your quarterback got hurt. So the Vikes are now tied with Green Bay. It's quite the North Central has gotten to be quite the football division for the NFL. You think about it, all these teams here in the division are amongst the best records in the whole league.
Yeah, a lot of good records. And the Packers did very well, and then quarterback Love got injured, a groin injury again. See how long he'll be out. But that backup quarterback is just as good as he is, and that's the second time he's come in, taken over, and done well. But it was a close call at the end.
Yeah, I know what that feels like. Still reeling from the Vikings last week, losing with that horrible officiating call. I don't know if it had anything to do with the outcome of the game, but it still leaves a sour taste in your mouth when you see three referees standing within 10 feet of a face mask follow, and none of them saw it.
Yeah.
All right, enough of that. What's in the mailbag?
Well, first I want to say a couple of people said I'm not answering their emails, and I do try to answer all emails, and so Andy checked, and my old email address was on the KROC file. I think some people were hitting that, and so I never got the email, so I couldn't answer. But my email address has been corrected thanks to Andy, and so if you go on the KROC website, and there's a place where you can hit the staff emails. But my email is tomostrom22@gmail.com, tomostrom22@gmail.com, and that's been corrected. And I had another number before on the old email, and that's been erased. The mailbag. So thanks for correcting that, Andy. The mailbag, the Babylon Bee satire. Polls show Democrats have a slight lead in early vote rigging. Early vote polls from swing states. The Democrats are clinging to a slight lead. We're still leading in vote rigging, said the ballot counter, and a phony name, who was in charge of putting up poster boards to block people from watching the ballots being counted in 2020. And Republicans, he said, are putting up more of a fight this time. Usually they didn't. And it's harder for me to enter Kamala's name on ballots because I just hate that cackle. But we've got illegal immigrants across the border helping us fill out the ballots.
Oh, my gosh.
Gosh, that's the Babylon Bee.
Okay, tied in with that, a new Gallup poll shows when it comes to photo ID for voting, overwhelming support, and it crosses party lines.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Republicans more enthusiastic about it than Democrats, but still a very strong majority of people identifying as Democrats also support photo ID and also support proof of citizenship to vote. You get down into questions about absentee ballots and mass mailings of absentee ballots. It gets to be more of a 50-50 ride in the polling, with Republicans not for it and Democrats for it. But on the big questions, there seems to be a really strong consensus for both photo ID and proof of citizenship.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. From Rose, what do you think is going on with the little rocket man? That's the North Korean communist dictator that Trump labeled that way. Rose says, what's in his head to send troops to Russia? Do you think he knows the Dems are going to pull something, or they don't think that there'll be a reaction. And we've just sent troops to Israel. Is the draft going to come back? This is getting scary. And then she said, I heard the ABC News story that Andy was referring to. He was disappointed in ABC reporting of an event. I have learned to distrust ABC. This morning, ABC talked about alleged conversations with Trump, complimenting the generals of Adolf Hitler. It was pathetic. Real journalism, I thought, that isn't opinion journalism. I thought in my journalism class should not include adjectives to describe a person or event, just the facts.
That used to be the AP rule book. You weren't supposed to use descriptors.
Yeah.
But that's thrown out the window now.
Isn't that something? Then this from Jan. He sent me some extraordinarily complex data. He said, here are some of the facts on the school board referendum for your radio show. Facts and information that counters the information that the official said is why they need it to tax us more. And he and a committee are on. You can check it. It's too complicated for me to summarize. But go to the website, say no to the tax man, say no to the tax man. And the charts and analysis that he sent me are there. And it's the staff on that committee is crunching the referendum numbers, and they've got the numbers from 2010 to 2024. It includes state funds, local funds, federal funds, and they said the statement that funding hasn't kept up with inflation is inaccurate, as these charts show. The Minnesota legislature has massively increased education by $2.2 billion over the next couple of years. You've got a general education formula allowance that's involved, and the district's combined revenue is a better indicator of it, and it includes state, federal, and local aid. And he's got combined district revenues over time and how much money, and very complicated charts. The superintendent, he said, provided an outline. Many of the items were already funded from previous budgets, and the budget should not be in deficit, even if this referendum fails. And this is from Jan, and you can go to Say No to the Taxman, where I guess some statistical wizards really have gone into this, including comparatives and proficiency rates in math, science, and reading that is not keeping up with the spending. That's the mailbag.
All right. We will take our break and come back in a moment. Or Rochester Today on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96 Dobley.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
We're back. More Rochester Today Tuesday with Tom Ostrom. State news, Tom. Where do you want to start?
A courier carrying ballots in his van left his van parked and the hatchback cover up, and all the ballots were exposed and unattended outside Edina City Hall. Hennepin County officials are onto this. This is from Minnesota News and Red State. The courier has been fired, or his company, and Hennepin County officials say the ballots were exposed. It's intolerable, but they were not tampered with. They've checked this over very, very carefully, and are on top of it.
Yeah, thankfully there was surveillance video showing the vehicle that shows nobody messed with it at all. But it certainly opened up the possibility that somebody could have just swiped the ballots.
Yeah.
And those voters' votes would not have been counted this time around, all due to sloppy human error.
Yeah. And within the last week, Minnesota News reported the University of Minnesota saw another protest on its campus last week. Students, alumni, faculty gathered at the University of Minnesota during a rally to support pro-Palestinian protesters, and some were arrested during their occupation of Morrill Hall. And the University of Minnesota saw this protest and justice for Palestine. You know, they call Trump a Nazi, and he's so pro-Israel. And these people are pro-Palestine, which means they're anti-Semitic. They never could get called that, I guess. At least I don't read that they're called that. But the planned demonstration led to Minnesota University rescheduling events. And the U of M president, Rebecca Cunningham, had students arrested. She said they were a threat to people, students and faculty. And since then, they've been released. But the fussing on campuses over this issue goes on.
On and on and on. And in this case, it was, pointed out quite directly. You had a demonstration that was fine, but then they committed crimes. They committed criminal damage to property. They obstructed movement on campus. They interfered with the operation of the school. And there were student and faculty groups after their arrest calling for their release and dismissal of any charges that might be filed because they were, arguing that their free speech rights had been violated. And I thought, my gosh, there is a difference between demonstrating and rioting and committing crimes. You cross the line, there always should be a punishment.
Right.
And I think most people share that view.
And some of the actions are felony level accusations, and they will be studied more. But one of the protesters, for example, was spitting on a police officer. So, yeah, it was violence. And the university president released a statement saying this was a risk to employees and to students and had involved property damage. And we have to take care of the security and safety of our campus.
Yeah, I'm glad they're not allowing it to get out of hand, as what we saw in the spring on some of the campuses across this country.
And that was 11 protesters that were arrested for barricading a building, but they're not called anti-Semitic or Hitler like Trump is, and he couldn't support Israel more, nor has he, and he's done a wonderful job. Tim Walz is in the news again. This is a October 23rd article by reporter Philip Lenshitsky that digging up old skeletons on Tim Walz when he was a teacher in Nebraska. He invited a delegation of Communist Party officials to his class. It says they were working for an institute. That must mean, they don't say it, but the Confucian Institute, where universities and colleges hosted Japanese or Chinese curricula and officials. So Walz invited them to his classes in Nebraska, and some Republicans in Congress want that looked at, and the FBI to look more at Walz's connections with China.
It's an interesting topic, but I don't think it's going to move the needle in the election, being a week away. And I have my doubts as to whether there's any nefarious motive on the part of Governor Walz. These teacher exchanges were very common in the 1990s as relations between China and the United States thawed quite a bit with Deng Xiaoping when he was in power. And there was a flood of Chinese citizens, business leaders, educators, name it, across the board, who obtained visas to visit the United States and do these sort of activities. I'm not saying that they were not up to, that the Chinese educators, business people, whatever, were not working for the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not suggesting that at all. But whether or not anybody on the receiving end of it in the United States was really cognizant of the motive, I have no way of saying. But it is interesting, too. I read an article last week, Tom. This congresswoman in New York is finding herself having to distance herself from what they call these Chinese hometown associations. And they're formed by Chinese immigrants moving to the United States, and they celebrate some of the activities that happen in their hometowns in China with parades and other celebrations. But now there have been accusations, including indictments, criminal indictments, that some of these hometown associations were, I guess, co-opted by the Chinese Communist Party and infiltrated and used for what you referred to in previous conversations as remote police offices for the Chinese to harass and intimidate Chinese dissidents in the United States. Mm-hmm. And this congresswoman in New York had long been involved in this hometown association, which was founded by her relatives, I believe, and was very active in it. And now there are allegations that this particular organization was among those that had been infiltrated by the Communist Party in China and used for those purposes of, gaining influence among lawmakers and others in the United States. I guess what I'm saying is, while I'm skeptical that you're going to find anything really horrible about walls, I'm also pointing out that this concept of influence peddling in the United States by the Chinese Communist Party using these types of visits is probably a real deal, a real thing.
It is. And these Confucian institutes that were so pro-Chinese at universities and colleges, most of which have been disbanded by colleges after the bad publicity. But these police stations that we talk about, I'd read that Waltz was aware of it and not concerned about it.
Yeah, well, like I say, though, there's a week left before the election. I don't know if it's going to have an impact.
Well, it's a lot of detail. People have enough to keep track of in the issues now. Medina police are warning residents. This was an early October article. Police believe that there are South American crime rings behind the burglaries of high-end metro homes in the Twin Cities. Here again, the illegal immigrants committing crimes here. And they're warning residents about high-end burglaries from what they call a sophisticated South American crime ring. And even some known Minnesota athletes' homes have been broken into. And Chief Jason Nelson told Alpha News they break into homes when people are gone. They know who the wealthy people are. They smash into rear glass doors or windows, high-value items, millions of dollars worth of items, jewelry and whatever have been stolen and sold, and involves what the police chief calls South American crime ring.
Organized crime ring, very sophisticated crime ring. The Polad family was among those ripped off, the owners of the Minnesota Twins. And I don't know the exact amount of the losses, but I know they are substantial. Very sophisticated operation, flying across the country, targeting specific homes. And then they believe the goods are being sent overseas because the stolen items are prominent enough, they'd probably be pretty hard to fence in the United States. It's just a crazy story when you read about it. There was one other one locally I wanted to cover, and I feel a little trepidation about this, but I try to steer away from commenting about local criminal cases, but a sentence was handed down yesterday in a Rochester murder case that I think many people are shocked and appalled about. Young man, 20 years old, was accused of and convicted of taking a gun and shooting another man at near point-blank range in the back of the head while the shooting victim was in a fight with the shooter's older brother in a dispute over a parking space at the Crossroads Shopping Center.
Gee.
Now, he was charged with intentional and unintentional murder, convicted of unintentional murder, and acquitted of intentional murder, which to me is a bit perplexing because to pick up a gun, walk over, aim it at a person's head, and pull the trigger seems pretty intentional.
Yeah.
But, the nuance of the law, perhaps there's more to it than I would care to comment on that aspect of it. Plus, a jury heard the evidence, and I'm not going to really question the decision of a jury. But the sentence for unintentional murder, presumptive in the state of Minnesota, is 12 and a half years. And it can range up to as high as 15 years under state sentencing guidelines. This young man was sentenced on Monday to 5 years in prison. He's already been in jail for many, many months. Will get credit for the time served. Minnesota correctional system, if you don't get into trouble when you're in prison, you serve 2/3 of your sentence. So this young man may only serve a few months, a matter of months, for taking the life of another person, regardless of the circumstances. He initially claimed self-defense, but the jury didn't buy that argument. And I know that during the sentencing hearing, his attorney tried to make comparisons between his actions by picking up a gun and shooting a person and the actions of an intoxicated driver driving a car and killing someone in a car crash. Both did take a person's life, both being heinous actions by an individual, actions of irresponsibility. But I don't think that comparison really flies when you're making a case for length of prison sentence. And I think most people would argue that the prison sentence for criminal vehicular homicide is too low in this state and should be elevated, considering you're taking another person's life. But this was an actual murder conviction. So yeah. I imagine that there are more than a few people upset by this judge's decision.
Yeah, I don't understand.
This case. If I was a member of the victim's family, I know I'd be appalled.
You bet.
Okay.
Hillary Clinton calling the...
Tom, we need to take a break for news, though.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll do that quick. We'll return and cover more national topics with Rochester Today, Tuesday morning on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96 FM. Good morning. Welcome back. Tuesday with Tom Ostrom. It's Rochester Today. I'm Andy Brownell. And now, Tom, what do you want to start with for more national topics?
Well, Hillary Clinton and other Democrats have called Trump's Madison Square Garden event Hitler, Nazi, because in 1939, when World War II started, Nazi Americans held an event there. How ridiculous and stupid that analogy is. Plus, Hillary and Bill and other Democrats have used that venue for their events, so they must be pro-Hitler too. And to make their accusations laughable, the Madison Square Garden event that Trump held yesterday will have more. Sunday will have more to say about it. But Jews flocked to that event at Madison Square Garden. There were hundreds, if not thousands, there. How do we know they were Jews? They had pro-Trump caps with the special clothing that they wear on their head, those little caps. And then the Orthodox Jews that have a noticeable clothing had Trump signs, and they were there. And so the Democrats, they're furious because the crowds were so huge, 70,000 people inside. They say tens of thousands outside. I don't know how they can calculate those crowd sizes, but it was a huge success for Trump at that event. The speeches were great. The people were attentive, and people were skilled in their presentations. But again, people who are called Hitlerites. And then the Gaza demonstrators who are really anti-Semitic, even supporting violence against Jews, they don't get called that.
So going back to the Madison Square Garden rally, it was interesting to me that the focus of the coverage of that rally immediately afterward and all the way through the day on Monday was focused on the comments of this comedian, Tony Hinchcliffe, I think is his name, but a lot of people know him by his program, which is on the internet, on YouTube, and has a very strong following called Kill Tony. And if it's what you'd call very offensive comedy. That would be the trademark of the entire show. And it is meant to offend. And if you were to go to one of his shows, if you did not know that ahead of time, you're probably in the wrong place. His comedy and the people who work with him, I don't know, shock comic, maybe might be the term. Why he would participate in this event might be the biggest criticism that you might be able to level at the organizers of the event is why would you have him be there? Because you know he's going to say something that is going to be offensive because that is his trademark.
Yeah.
And he has a huge following among young people, particularly young men. And I suspect that that is the reason that he was invited, because the Trump campaign is very much courting that demographic through his appearances on Joe Rogan's podcast and other events on these online blogs. And this guy has, millions of followers. His events, I've watched some of it, and it's not my brand of comedy, so I was like, not for me. But he's a equal opportunity insulter, and the fact that he threw out some pretty nasty stuff shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. But it is interesting that it was the focus of all the coverage of the rally, ignoring the huge crowds and some of the other speakers who did get up there and get huge reactions from the crowd before Trump came out and gave his usual, rally. What do they call it now? The weave, where he just kind of meanders all over the place in his discussions.
Yeah. Well, it was a huge, huge success.
Oh, on the other thing, really quickly on that, I read a really interesting opinion piece about Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris and others talking about trying to make the comparisons to this rally to the Nazi event of 1939 and also, or is it 1938? I can't remember which year. And the claims that Trump has, what you would call it, a sympathetic view to Hitler, maybe?
Yeah.
That have been leveled by others. And that this column writer argued that those allegations being leveled at this stage in the campaign and the coverage of them by the media, which has been oversized, is actually going to hurt Kamala Harris's chances of winning the election, because after the last 4 years, the American voters are getting, not all obviously, but probably enough, if you read the polling, that are shifting things toward Trump's favor. Enough are fed up with what they're seeing as a very biased coverage of the former president, and also fed up with the attacks being made by the Democrats, which seem oversized considering the track record he had during his 4 years as presidency. That's right. To paraphrase this columnist.
That's right. His track record as president indicated none of the charges. Trump said at the rally that Harris is dangerous because she's inept and she'll be a vessel for the radical left to totally control her. But RFK Jr. was great. Elon Musk was great. Tucker Carlson, I think if Trump's reelected, he should have Tucker be the press secretary. Tulsi Gabbard was there. His wife, Melania, strikingly beautiful and surprisingly eloquent. Democrats have tried to make her a moron because she has that Slavic East Europe accent where she's from. She speaks 7 languages, which I'm sure none of her critics can. The Trump family was there. Dr. Phil was even there. I don't know if that'll affect his popularity or not on television. But
ironically, that comedian I was talking about has a character who regularly appears on his show who plays a character who is like Dr. Phil and is equally as offensive as this Tony Hinchcliffe is. That's funny that he was actually, Dr. Phil was among those there.
Yeah, that's so funny. But again, these charges, Rick Grenell was Trump's ambassador to Germany, and he resigned from the board of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Why? Because the panel is silent in response to Kamala Harris's calling Trump Adolf Hitler. And Grenell said the museum leadership's silence in the face of these horrible attacks on her political opponent. I've been part of this board for a long time. No condemnation, and I'm resigning. And then Trump's vice presidential candidate gave a great speech too. And he on a press conference, J.D. Vance was asked by a reporter, how come Trump's ex-aides are going against him, calling him names? And Vance said, because he fired some for incompetence, like General John Kelly. General Kelly said Trump complimented Hitler's generals at a meeting. He said, a lot of us were at that meeting, or I wasn't, but some who were said it never happened. A statement was not made. And he said, Kelly is mad because Trump didn't take his advice. And these people wanted to be around. They want to write books. And Kelly was antagonistic, and Trump fired him. That's why he's saying these things.
Anything else we have to cover for national news? Oh, well, I know what.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to mention that I saw that the Washington Post has joined the L.A. Times in deciding not to endorse anyone for president this year, which was surprising.
Yeah. Major liberal newspapers like the Washington Post and the L.A. Times, and their owners are really getting flack. They're liberal owners, but they decided not to do it. So people have canceled subscriptions, and staff members have quit over it. But go ahead.
I was going to say, the reason I found it so surprising is that both of those newspapers, you read their editorial page leading up to this, they have largely been among the most vocal critics of Trump and probably among the most vocal cheerleaders of the Harris campaign.
Yeah.
And for them to decide this late in the game that they're not going to endorse anybody it begs an explanation, that's for sure.
Well, I think the explanation is they're frightened by Kamala Harris's obvious ineptitude and refusal to answer questions, and maybe they don't want her elected either now. And then large groups of Muslim leaders have endorsed Trump. He went to Michigan at a rally a while back, and a Muslim mayor of a major city and other Muslims, including clerics, said, we stand with President Trump because he promises peace in the Middle East, not war.
Well, we have one more week left, and we'll find out what happens, correct?
Yep.
It's going to be, I think, a very, very late night next Tuesday night. Because right before we started this program, I looked at some of the major polling sites, and it continues neck to neck. I mean, Trump has a little bit of a lead in some of the battleground states. Other places, it's a near tie, or Kamala Harris has a very, very slight lead. So, in other words, it's a 50-50 toss-up right now, according to the polls. And the polls have proven themselves in past years, at least recent years, to be not all that accurate. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. We have to take a break, Tom. We'll be back in a moment. More Rochester Today on News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96 Tablet.
Rochester Today with Andy Brownell and Tom Ostrom on News Talk 1340 KROC AM and 96.9 FM.
Welcome back. We have a few minutes left in the program. Rochester Today, it's Tuesday, and then we're going to get out of here and enjoy the beautiful summer weather, right, Tom?
You bet.
I have to work more, but okay. Over the weekend, the Israelis struck back. A very measured retaliation against the Iranians, but symbolically and strategically, Tom, I think it's a lot more significant than it's being given credit for. The Israelis apparently have decimated the Iranian air defenses, including some supposedly sophisticated Russian technology brought in by the Iranians to protect installations from this type of airstrike. And the Israelis have more or less crippled, according to what I read as intelligence assessments, their capabilities to protect the airspace. And right now, the Israelis can pretty much do whatever they want from the air. over Iran, leaving them extraordinarily vulnerable at this point. And I'm sure that is not lost to the mullahs, who are being somewhat subdued in their response.
Yeah. And Israel, I guess, obeyed the Biden administration's sanction, not to go after nuclear sites or oil refineries, so they didn't. But as you say, they hit military targets, and their jet planes proved that they could get that long distance to Iran and back. None of them were shot down, and they all made the trip when it was thought that they couldn't. And some very strategic military sites and targets and weaponry were attacked. So Israel is showing that it can do pretty much what it wants in the Middle East, and then they're warning Iran not to retaliate for that or they'll get more. But not all is perfect in Israel. 7 Israelis were charged with spying for Iran. They carried out 600 missions. They got about $300,000 apiece. The leader of the spy group had evidently some serious financial problems, and he took the bait on Iran's offer to pay. And they really got some good intelligence against Israel and gave it to Iran, including photographs of missile sites and the Iron Dome and harbor shots. But they're caught, and the Israeli security has captured these people, 12 of them, adults, but a couple of teenagers too. And it's just frightening that even Israel, as so threatened with their existence as they are, has people within its ranks that were traitors.
It kind of brings to mind in the 1950s when you had Americans accused of selling or providing the Soviet Union with secrets about the United States nuclear capabilities and technologies, putting themselves at risk of, and the entire world at a greater risk of annihilation through an exchange of nuclear weapons. And when you have the close proximity of Israel to its enemies, to have people who are Israelis cooperating with people who are sworn to exterminate the Jews seems incomprehensible.
Yeah. And, Rose mentioned, too, the danger of U.S. troops being in Israel and in the Ukraine, helping Ukrainians man these sophisticated weapon sites. And Putin has warned again. He said Moscow will respond if the West helps Ukraine strike deeply into Russia. NATO targets, U.S. troops will be considered targets. The direct involvement of these countries is expanding the war.
Well, at the same time, the Russians are importing, the latest reports, 10,000 North Korean troops and readying them to fight probably in the Kursk region to try to expel the Ukrainians. That would certainly be viewed by the West as a significant escalation in this conflict because of the worries that it provides in other parts of the world, the use of North Korean troops and involvement in this. And you were mentioning the strikes deep into Russia. Without the U.S. technology and our sophisticated missile systems, the Ukrainians have become quite adept at manufacturing and using long-range drones to carry out substantially damaging strikes to airfields, munition plants, energy facilities deep into Russia, which has made it more difficult for the Russians to meet their logistical needs of the troops who are trying to push back against the Ukrainians, both in East Ukraine and in that Kursk region. And I don't know how Russia responds to that other than lobbing more missiles into Ukraine itself and trying to inflict similar damage.
Those Korean troops are evidently going to be within Russian territory trying to expel Ukrainian attacks. but some say they could well go into the Ukraine itself. And Vladimir Putin welcomed Trump's vow to end the Ukraine war. He said, Putin said, I think Trump is sincere, and we welcome statements like that, because Trump told supporters recently that as president he would bring about a truce his first day in office. He said, I will call Putin, I will call Ukrainian President Zelensky, I'll say we've got to stop this. And he said, I'll put an end to the Middle East wars, and I will not endorse striking Iran. I want them part of the talks too. We've got to have peace in these regions and avoid World War III. And he said, so that's his agenda, to try to do something about these regional wars, because there were no wars, as he said, in his administration.
Whether he can pull that off remains to be seen. A lot of it has happened in the last 4 years on the geopolitical front. I think both Putin and Zelensky would welcome a way out. Whether or not you can find a path for that to happen is anybody's guess at this point, because I think slowly but surely Putin's position is being degraded by this war. And, of course, Zelensky and his country are fighting for survival. So, but whether or not that can be translated into some sort of diplomatic solution at this point in the game, I hope it can.
Yeah.
Because the alternatives are bad. There's already been enough loss of life and destruction of property to go around. It's terrible. Okay.
Well, I think Russia would have to get some of the Russian-speaking provinces of Ukraine, but maybe Russia would have to give part of the Crimea back too. But we'll see what would happen.
And what kind of security guarantees could the Ukrainians get? Because I think that's key to it. I don't think the Ukrainians are going to settle anything unless they have something more than Putin's word that another invasion will not occur.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got to run. Goodness gracious. We'll talk Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
See where things are at. Tom Ostrom, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you in a few days. I'm Andy Brownell. This is Rochester Today at News Talk 1340, KROC AM and 96.